So hello, my name's Andy and I'm a social entrepreneur. So I'm not an entrepreneur, but I've been working for the last sort of 9 years of my career, working with seeing how we can generate positive change through business. So I've worked with charities, working in supply chains, I've worked for a consultancy, and then more recently, the last 2 years or so, I've been working with Cook as their social impact manager. And that's basically, as Catherine said, how do we make a business which is making a profit, but also having a positive impact on the planet and the people that we work with. Cook is 21 years old now. We've got about 90 stores around the country. We also have freezers in about 500 other shops, and we employ about 1,000 people, or just over 1,000 people now. So it's sort of what I'll do today is do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the origins of Cook. So I wasn't involved in them, but I've heard our founder Ed talk about them quite a lot. And there's also, I'll recommend a web podcast called Conversations of Inspiration, which Ed, I think that literally was released yesterday. And Ed is chatting there to the founder of Not for the High Street about the origins of Cook. So it's a really good one to say about how this happened, the entrepreneurial struggle, but also how we made sure we kept sort of social good at the core of the business. Cool, so let's get going. So yeah, in the beginning there was cake. So Ed grew up in a sort of family of, his parents were originally teachers, but they started up a coffee shop, well, a couple of coffee shops in Kent, and they also had a kitchen where they were making cakes as well. So they were making and selling cakes to other businesses around the area. And it was sort of in this area, next slide. So that's Ed here. This is like the hero of the story, basically. So this is when Ed had just finished school. He didn't go to university. He started working for the family business straight away. And he was sort of running their factory shop. So this is where they were selling the frozen cakes. So he was going around Kent selling frozen cakes to other cafes, to restaurants and things like that. And all the way during this time, Ed had a bit of an idea. He was thinking, if we can make, so they had sales of about £2,500 a week. If we can make money selling frozen desserts and frozen cakes, maybe there's an opportunity for us to do that with frozen savoury food. And that sort of had really come from, apparently, as they were growing up, like small family business, his mum would be making chili con carnes or beef bourguignons on Sunday evenings, whacking it all in a ice cream tub, put it in the chest freezer, so people could go and like dip into that as they go. So from sort of like the work he was doing there and also the family experience, he sort of thought he had an idea that could work. But he wasn't like openly working on this. He was like building up his sales experience. Ed's got the gift of the gab for sure. He could sell snow to an Eskimo. That's sort of his main strength for sure. And he said that. I'm just quoting him, so that's fine. Next slide, yeah. So what basically happened is Ed had this idea. It was bubbling away for a while. And this is the other co-founder of Cook, a guy called Dale. So Dale is a chef, as you can see there, and he's someone that Ed was selling cakes to for a long time. So quite often, like monthly or so, Ed would go around to the kitchens. They'd deal with the business pretty quickly. Yeah, we'll have that many cakes over the time. And then they'd have a cup of tea and a cigarette, and Ed would just talk about his idea at Dale. And they'd keep on going at it. They'd talk away. And they basically, as Ed said there, he basically fell in love with this guy. They were sort of kindred spirits and a strong sort of idea. So eventually, when Ed decided that he wanted to make a go of this business, so he had a chat with his parents. So he said, I want to have a go at, why don't we make savoury food? And they decided that rather than running that through their existing business, it was a better idea for him to go out on his own and try it separately. So basically, Ed said, yep, I'm going to do that. First person he went to go and see is Dale. It's like, Dale, will you come and start this business with me? Will you sort of explore how we can make great frozen food that people want to eat? And I think it was a pretty useful time, a pretty convenient time. Dale was having a bit of a run-in with his boss, who was like, yeah, why not? Let's go and do this. And that's how they started off. Yeah, next slide. So basically what happened was Ed was able to borrow a small amount of money, something like £6,000 from his parents. He got one bank loan from one bank, something like nationwide, and he started up the casserole company. So this was like the company which started, was where the food production was. So this is where Dale was working. Apparently, amazingly, like the kitchen setup they had back then is really similar to the one we have now in our kitchen in Sittingbourne, which has got sort of 180 people in working there. So still very similar idea of how you scale up this food. So Dale was basically given the task of start this kitchen and start making amazing frozen food on a budget of about 18 grand, which was, to this day, they're not quite sure how they did it. So as well as this £12,000 loan they took to start the casserole company, next slide, they also, from another bank, I'll leave it to your imagination whether they told them about the other one, they got a £12,000 loan to make cakes and casseroles. So this was a shop in Farnham where they were actually selling the frozen cakes and also things like beef bourguignon, casserole. So basically the idea here was 6 portion meals. There's about 5 things on the menu. You come in here and you buy it and you cater for your family or for a dinner party. So that's how sort of the origins of Cook's really started. I think basically here, when Ed started this shop, to break even, he was looking to make about £2,500 a week. First week they made £1,050. And what became pretty apparent early on, people came in, they had a look around, like, this is a good idea. Like, I like the idea of a six portion casserole. Do you do them in smaller portions? No, we just do the 6 portion. So about apparently three or so weeks in, it was becoming so apparent that the demand was not quite for the 6 portions, but actually for some smaller portions. So this was like a classic example of a entrepreneurial spirit. You need to be flexible. So if you're out there, you need to be listening to what your customers said. So they started to change the offering a little bit there to cater for sort of smaller portions. So that's the sort of the 2 origin points of Cook there. Next slide. So for a few years, that company went on. That existed for a while. I think it was about 2 or 3 years in. But the kitchen that I showed there was on a very, I'd say, fortuitous agreement. They'd stumbled across this place in a estate where they could basically say they could rent the kitchen for about 50 quid a week, but they were on very short-term notice, so that was going to be knocked down. So eventually that got called in, and the business was growing nicely as well, so they needed to build a bigger kitchen. And at this point, they looked to get some more funding from the banks. Ed and Dale will both agree that bookkeeping wasn't their strength, so they sort of went into the bank meeting like with a menu. The bank manager asked, "Cool, can we see your accounts?" And Ed was like, "I'll get back to you on that." So I think at that point he realised that it helped to have a real grown-up, as Ed describes his younger brother James. So James by that point had started running the family business, so the Coffee Corco. And it seemed like, so with the expansion of the casserole company going on, it seemed like a great time for the 2 businesses to merge. So that's what happened. And so Ed will say, like openly, like a lot of the growth came here from actually having a proper adult on board in James, and he's a proper business savvy person. So that's sort of actually that's apparently the initial napkin where the Cook logo was scribbled down. So this is actually when Cook was born. Yes, so reckless growth, reckless borrowing. So I think at this point we were up to around about 18 stores. And I think James and Ed went to a bank and they said, we want to expand. We're thinking about doubling. And the bank managers were like, why don't you quadruple? So it was a time where there was a lot of money available. So they ended up getting something like a £4.5 million loan. And they were actually expanding like a shop a month. So it was 12 shops that year they were rolling out. So they weren't making a huge amount of profit, but they were getting out there and growing the brand. And I guess what Ed would say at this point. They were young. They could pour their entire energy into that. They didn't have sort of young families at this point. So it was like a period, reckless growth, reckless borrowing. And then, great timing, Sophie, thank you. So 2008, 2009, near death. So financial crisis, collapse of Lehman Brothers. Apparently, so as this hit overnight, sales in the business dropped about 10%. So real material impact from the financial crisis straight away. So there was a meeting sort of with the financial team, the senior management of Cook at the time, and it was basically, it looked like if nothing serious happened in the next 6 months, the business was going to go bust. So really, really tricky times. And I think it's sort of this time which sort of was a real like tipping point in what happened with Cook. So what basically happened, actually you go to the next slide. So one of the things I was asked to do today is I'm basically stealing some of Ed's advice. And one of the things that we often say at Cook now is focus on the focus. So in this sort of terrible moment where all of the work which they've been doing for years and years, pouring their heart and soul into a business, and there was all this doubt about, okay, is this company going to survive? So they started to focus on the focus. So basically, as Ed says, anything that wasn't tied down, we sold or got rid of. So we stopped rubbish collecting in the shops. People would just take it home to theirs. Stopped the window cleaning. Sophie told me earlier that the finance team was talking about it. People had to bring their own tea and coffee in. It really was any expenses that weren't necessary were taken out. So what was really important was continue to provide the great customer service in the shops, and also don't scrimp on ingredients. So we needed to make sure that the food was the same level it was. And that's something that you hear all around the Cook office now is focus on the focus. And the second thing which really strikes me is, persevere. So the way that Ed talks about this, there was offers out there. So they could have gone out and got a lot of investments at that point. And he says it would have made the pain go away. So sort of overnight, they could have gone, clicked their fingers and said, okay, this business will survive because we're going to take external investment. But what that would have meant is that the future of Cook wouldn't have been theirs to control anymore. So they were able to persevere and say, okay, we've got a vision, we want to follow it, we want it to be an independent business, we want to have be the masters of our own destiny. And for that reason, I think Ed values this as one of the most sort of desirable characteristics in anyone he wants to work with. You can be charismatic, you can be a good leader, you can be intelligent, but if you've got no perseverance, and I guess that's why I think there's still quite a good entrepreneurial spirit within Cook. So yeah, there's sort of two areas which happened. So we didn't, they ended up taking some investment from some high net worth individual, but that was sort of a friend of the family. So other than that, they were able to maintain ownership of the business. And that sort of really has laid the foundations for where we are right now. So yeah, it was around this time. So after the financial crisis, we were able to steady the ship, and through like franchises and things like that, and more selling more through concessions, we were getting good revenue streams in, and the growth was going pretty well. And it was at this point we really wanted to start to think about more about the impact we were having. So it was around 2012, 2013. As the senior team were thinking about what is it that Cook wants to be as a business. We've always wanted to invest in our people and have a positive impact, but what does that look like? And that's when James Perry, so the guy we saw earlier, he'd been over in the US and he'd come across this movement called the B Corp movement. We just have a show of hands. Who's heard of B Corp? Cool. So about half people. So basically, this is the idea behind the B Corp movement. It's business as a force for good. So it's the idea that a business can change their articles of the business to say, we want to make a profit, but we want to do that in a way that takes into account the planet and the people and communities that we're working with. So this really aligned nicely with what Cook was thinking about as a sort of a growing business. So in 2013, we became one of the the first B Corps in the UK, and we've been a B Corp ever since. Next slide. And yeah, and we're still amazingly proud to be part of the B Corp movement. And sort of two of the things that we use it for at the moment are we see it as a critical and honest friend. So this is one of my favourite. I have this GIF in pretty much every presentation I give. So there's a Friends episode where Rachel was asked to make a trifle for her mates, and there was she was using a cookbook, and the page got stuck together. So she ended up putting beef in the trifle, and they were all sitting around the Thanksgiving table, and they decided we're not going to tell her. We're not going to tell her that there's beef. It doesn't taste good. So they were all just sitting around there going, this is lovely, this is brilliant, whilst hiding the food in different places. We didn't want that. We wanted a critical and honest friend. And that's what the B Corp certification does. So there's quite a rigorous questionnaire which goes through many different parts of the business. So your governance systems, your environmental performance, how you engage with your suppliers in the community, and also how you look after your people. So we use that. So now you have to do the assessment every 3 years, and it gives you a really clear score. It's you're doing this well in environment, you're doing this well in community, you're doing this well in terms of your people. So we still use that as a very honest gauge of how we're doing as a business, and we will continue to do so. And another reason we love the B Corp movement. Next slide. Yeah, so old African proverb here, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think it was Paul Polman of Unilever who said, if we achieve our sustainability targets, but no one else does, then we failed. And that's sort of, no one business is big enough to have the impact that we need to have to sort of right the ship at the moment. So the B Corp, becoming a B Corp isn't just about one business trying to be a force for good. It's about working with other businesses. It's about learning from other businesses, sharing where you're getting to. And yeah, I was blown away. So when I joined Cook, it was pretty much my first interaction with the B Corp community. But I've not met a more generous community who's saying, oh yeah, we did that. We learnt about how to encourage your staff to do more recycling, or oh yeah, setting targets for environmental performance. We did that. Come look at our policy. Come and have a chat. So that's an amazing thing, which we found, well, two amazing things we found about being a B Corp there. So yeah, really happy to talk about the challenges of becoming a B Corp, but also the positives of anyone who's wanting to know a bit more later on. So other things I was asked to do today was just think about some aha moments. So I've tried to steal a few of Ed's from earlier, but I've sort of gone to mine. So this is basically the last couple of years at Cook, what we've been looking at. So what's been really, really useful for Cook is we've spent a long time trying to articulate our purpose. So why do we exist as a business? And for some businesses that's sort of happened straight away. We know that's their purpose. And I think for Cook, it took a while. People knew what we wanted to do, but it was a bit harder to actually to articulate that. And so a couple of years ago, we came up with Nourishing relationships. So that's the purpose of Cook now is about nourishing relationships. And we have 4 main pillars of that. So nourish relationships with customers and communities, food and where it comes from, people and their work, and business and society. And we now use that as a framework, like a shared language within the business. And it's so useful to have that, that language that you can use as a business to say, okay, what are you guys doing in your job to nourish relationships? So that was like a good framework to start off with. But when I came to Cook, we were doing loads and loads of great stuff, but it was all a bit here, there, and everywhere. So there wasn't like a clear strategy. And it felt like I was being pulled in all directions. And I can imagine that in any sort of young business or any business, you want to have a positive impact, but you can definitely be pulled down to areas without being too strategic. So that's something which I'd say was an aha moment for me. If we go to the next slide. So we went through a process where we identified what was really important to us. We thought about prioritizing them. We wanted to set our ambition in those areas, and then it was all about communicating it and bringing it to life. So we had a bit of a session where we sat down, and using the framework I just talked about, we came up with 18 sort of sustainability areas which were really important to the business. So this was quite hard, and you can go really granular, or you can go a bit broader. But we felt that these are the 18 areas which, as a business, we needed to have an answer for. We needed to know where we were moving. So that was a good first step to actually say, okay, these are the areas that we're gonna focus on the focus. We're gonna focus on these areas. The next step was about prioritization. How many people have heard of a materiality matrix? No, cool. So this is like a tool which sort of the GRI, who are a big, they're all about sustainability reporting. They recommend that all businesses who are using their framework go through this process. So basically, it's a bit of science, it's a bit of art, but the idea is that you can use this technique to better understand which of those issues you've identified are more important to you. So down along the x-axis here, you've got how important is it to cook, and the y-axis here, how important is it to external stakeholders. So what we basically did is went through a process of speaking to internal staff, got them to rank of those 18 issues we just looked at, what's more important. We spoke to a few external stakeholders, but also just used our knowledge to have a good guess about what our customers thought and what other people thought. So this is why it's a bit of a science. So I worked for a consultancy who charged out this piece of work at £100,000 for massive businesses. You can do it in a 2-hour session. It's just a useful tool which you can start to prioritize your different things. So we did this draft. This is our draft one. It's what we did, but it was really so useful just to say, okay, this is what we care about. Let's have an honest conversation about which is most important to us as a business and our stakeholders. So the idea is basically everything on here is important. There's no argument about that, but the ones that go right to the top right are the ones which are most important right now. And it's interesting, like things like packaging for us. So if you did this pre-Blue Planet 2, packaging may have been a bit lower. But you do it post Blue Planet 2, packaging suddenly shoots to the top. So this has got to be a living document because it changes all the time. But for us, doing this process meant that we just had real clarity about where we were going. At that point, we then thought about, in those different areas, what's our level of ambition? So where do we want to be? Do we want to be a beginner, performer, leader, pioneer? And when you sort of just make that decision, you can then think about, okay, how far do you want to go in that area? So we basically did that, and we thought about like up to 2030. Sorry, that's been cut off a bit. But yeah, across these different areas, we sort of set ourselves an idea, where do we want to be? And it just meant that we had a touch point where we could go back and check on our different areas. So this is something that we go back to fairly regularly. As I said, things change. You've got to be fluid, you've got to be agile. But wanting to be a social business, we want to have an answer for all of these. We want to be at least a performer by 2023. But there's also some areas we want to focus and become leaders, or even like right at the cutting edge of where we are. That whole process, on the tables around you, there is something we call our 2020 to-do list. So that whole process helped us do this. So this is basically 15 targets, 15 goals that we set ourselves as a business about what we want to do by 2020. So by doing that materiality process, it made it a lot easier to come up with these goals, which have become really helpful in how we communicate with our people, but also externally. Yeah, and that's another like aha moment for me. So it's a massively important bit about being a sustainable business or a socially conscious business is you need to get people on board. You can't just have like one or two people in a bubble saying, yeah, we're a business. It's all about how do you get really good engagement. And this is something we're still learning a hell of a lot at the moment. But what we're basically thinking is to get buy-in. Click the slide. So the more people in the companies the more people who buy in, the more people are going to contribute. And then the feedback there, the more people who contribute, the more they're going to buy in. So this was a learning, is that we set these goals and they're great because they set out where we want to go. But as you look at these, some of them are really easy. Different people in the business can contribute to these, but some of them are a bit like removed. And I guess in hindsight, if we're setting goals in the future, we'd want to make sure we have a lot more where there's easy touch points for people to contribute. So that's something that which we'll be working on in the future. So the more ability there is for people to contribute, really get involved, the more buy-in, and then you can have a positive feedback loop there around engagement in the social area. So that's one aha moment. I think I've got one more. Yes. So I think this is Ed's favourite quote, pretty much. Sophie, would you agree? Yeah. So a 80s rocker. I hadn't heard of him, but it says, just when you get the rat race licked, boom, here comes faster rats. So this is used as a don't be complacent. There's always going to be new businesses coming on, other businesses adapting their range. Don't get comfortable. You need to keep on moving forward. So for me, that's definitely true of Cook as our products and things like that. But also to be a truly sustainable business, I think you need to like buy into that as well. So next slide, yeah. So a recent quote I read, I can't remember who said it, but sustainability is no longer about doing less harm. It's about doing more good. And I think that's a really important thing about where businesses are going now. It's not just about doing nothing or doing what pays. It's about how do you move up this list here to being more generative. And I stole this from a lady called Kate Raworth. She did a book called Donut Economics. And what I'd recommend is just Googling Kate Raworth, Donut Economics, meaning. She did a talk, meaning conference last year, and it's 20 minutes, which will just really help change your mindset in this area. And what she says is that basically we're stuck at the moment between a 21st century mindset. So that's how do we extract value from something? So that's the general 20th century mindset. How do we get like financial value from something? And then the next thing is the 21st century mindset. So that's how do we generate value? So it's how do we move from everything we do as a business to, from a sustainability point of view, from being something down here to actually generating positive social change, environmental change for people. And that's something which is a big aha moment for me, and something that I need to question myself a lot. Is like, is what we're doing, how much of it is down here? So some of it is still down here, but how do we challenge ourselves to move up that list to be more generative? Yeah, so that's a good question, I think, for yourselves. Anytime you make a decision, just think, how can we be more generative? How can we work to have a bigger shared positive impact for the business and society? Yeah, and that's all I've got. So thank you very much, and very, very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.